One phone call, that was it. That was the tiny, insignificant pinprick that ruptured the entire illusion of my life. It came on a Tuesday afternoon, a day so painfully ordinary that its memory feels like a mockery. I was at my desk in my small home office, sketching a new logo design, the afternoon sun slanting through my window, the scent of stale coffee lingering in the air. My world was small, manageable, and mine. I had built it myself, brick by brick. And then my phone buzzed, displaying a number I didn't recognize from a different area code. I almost ignored it. I get spam calls all the time, but for some reason, a flicker of professional obligation made me answer. Lord, how I wish I had just let it go to voicemail. The voice on the other end wasn't angry or accusatory. It was worse. It was procedural, detached, the voice of a man simply doing his job, a man from a collections agency. He asked for me by name, my full legal name, which was the first little jolt of unease. He started talking about a massive outstanding debt, a commercial loan that was months in default. The words floated past me, nonsensical and absurd, like a language I didn't speak. A business loan. I was a graphic designer. The only business I ran was myself. A solo operation with a laptop and a W-2. For a dizzying second, I was sure it was a scam, some elaborate phishing attempt, a mistake. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation, but then he said the words that vaporized all logic. He mentioned the cosign of my father. In that singular, horrifying instant, it felt like the floor didn't just vanish, the whole universe I had meticulously built, the very foundation of my identity, which was rooted in the unconditional love and trust of my family, shattered into a million glittering, razor-sharp pieces. Time seemed to slow down. The man's voice droning on about interest rates and payment obligations, while a silent movie of my life flickered behind my eyes. My father's reassuring smile, my mother's protective hugs, every family dinner, every holiday, every single memory now tainted, recast as a scene in a long, elaborate deception. This is the story of how I, the responsible one, the good daughter, stumbled into my family's secret financial world, a dark, desperate world they had built using my name, my credit, and my future, all behind my back. It's the story of a catastrophic breakdown of trust with the very people who were supposed to be my safe harbor, and the painful, messy, necessary steps I had to take to rebuild my life from the absolute smoking rubble. Before we get into the heart of it, if you've ever felt the profound sting of betrayal or the dizzying confusion of a family secret, if you've ever looked at someone you love and felt like you were staring at a stranger, I hope you'll subscribe. My goal here isn't just to tell you my story, but to carve out a space where we can talk about the hard stuff, the things that leave scars, a place where we can acknowledge the pain and maybe, just maybe, find our way through it together. To really understand how a lie of this magnitude could be constructed, how it could grow for years right under my nose, you have to understand the family I came from. On the surface, we were the picture of middle-class, suburban stability. We lived in a pleasant two-story house on a tree-lined street. My dad was a charismatic, big ideas guy, a natural salesman who could charm anyone. He was always chasing the next big thing, the one venture that was going to be our ticket to the life he felt we deserved. My mom was his opposite, the quiet, steady force who managed the household, the one who kept our home life from spinning completely out of control under the turbulent weather system of my father's ambitions. Then there were the kids. My older brother Mark was the golden child. It wasn't just in my head. It was an observable fact. He was effortlessly athletic, conventionally handsome, and possessed a social grace that made him universally popular. In my parents' eyes, he was destined for greatness, a reflection of their own best qualities. And then there was me. If Mark was the sun, I was the quiet moon. I was the responsible one, the studious one, the peacemaker. My role in the family ecosystem was established early and reinforced daily. While Mark was out collecting sports trophies and accolades, I was collecting awards for perfect attendance and good citizenship. While he was at parties with his sprawling group of friends, I was at home helping my mom navigate the labyrinth of grocery store coupons, or more often sitting at the dining room table as an audience of one for my dad's latest grand business plan. He'd spread his blueprints and spreadsheets and market projections across the polished wood, his eyes lit with a familiar, almost feverish hope. "This is it, kiddo," he'd say, his voice full of booming certainty. "This is the one that sets us all up for life. Your mother won't have to worry anymore. Mark will have his college paid for. And you can do whatever you want." And I bought it. I bought it every single time, with the wide-eyed earnestness of a child who believes in magic. I didn't just love my family. I believed in them, implicitly. My entire identity was interwoven with theirs, tied up in being the dependable daughter, the anchor, in a family of dreamers and worriers. My validation came from being useful, from being praised for my steadiness. Beneath this carefully curated surface, however, there was always a low, persistent hum of financial anxiety. My dad's ventures were almost always busts rather than booms. There was the high-end coffee shop that lasted 6 months, the import-export idea that never got past the business plan stage, the brief and disastrous foray into multi-level marketing that left our garage full of unsellable water purifiers. I remember that time so clearly. For months, our 2-car garage was an impassable maze of cardboard boxes, filled with these clunky plastic jugs and filters. My dad held weekly opportunity meetings in our living room, and I would have to help my mom set out platters of cheese and crackers. Only a handful of people ever came, and I remember this strained, desperate optimism in my dad's voice as he gave his pitch. After it failed, the boxes just sat there for years, a monument to the failure, until my mom quietly, painstakingly, broke them all down and put them out for recycling over the course of a month, never saying a word about it. After each failure, the hum of anxiety would get louder. I'd overhear hushed, tense arguments filtering through their bedroom door late at night. Fragmented phrases about maxed-out cards, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, and just needing a little more time. But whenever I, a worrier by nature, would dare to ask if everything was okay, the response was always the same placating smile from my mother, her hand patting mine. "Everything is fine, sweetheart. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. These are adult problems." It was our family mantra, a verbal shield to keep the messines of reality at bay. I was led to believe that secrets weren't malicious. They were a form of protection, a necessary kindness to preserve our childhood innocence. I understand now, with the brutal clarity of hindsight, that this kind of chronic secrecy is its own insidious form of betrayal. It doesn't protect it infinitely. It slowly, systematically eats away at the foundations of trust, until the whole house, once a symbol of safety, just collapses in on itself. Looking back, the signs were all there, a constellation of little red flags that my training had conditioned me to see as green. There was that time when I was 19, home from college for the summer, when my dad asked for my social security number. "It's to put you on the new family phone plan, kiddo. We'll get a better rate all bundled together," he'd said with a casual wave of his hand. It seemed completely normal, and I rattled it off without a second thought. Then there were the weirdly frequent credit card offers that would show up in my name at my parents' house, even after I'd moved out. Premium cards, cards with high limits. I'd see them on the mail table when I visited. When I asked about them, my mother would scoop them up and toss them in the recycling bin with a dismissive shrug. "Oh, it's just junk mail. They send them to everyone. I'll get rid of it for you." I thought she was just being helpful, tidying up. The biggest flag, the one that now seemed so blindingly obvious, was their insistence on helping me with my taxes every year. I had a simple Return 1 W-2 from my design job, but they turned it into a state secret. "Oh, it's just so complicated, honey. The laws change every year," my dad would say, taking my documents into his home office. "Let me handle it. It's no trouble." An hour later, he'd emerge with a perfectly compiled folder and a pen, pointing to the line where I needed to sign. I just thought they were being kind, taking care of their responsible but financially clueless daughter. It never, not for 1 second, occurred to me to question it. Why would I? These were the people who taught me right from wrong, who tucked me in at night and promised they would always, always protect me. My role as the family's designated peacemaker made me uniquely vulnerable. When my dad's volatile mood would swing from ecstatic highs during the big idea phase to depressive, irritable lows after another business deal inevitably flopped, I was the mediator. I'd be the one to coax him out of his study, to listen for hours as he rationalized the failure. I'd calm my mom down, who would be beside herself with anxiety, and reassured my brother Mark that it would all be okay, that Dad would bounce back. I absorbed the family's collective stress. It was my function. It was my job. I didn't know it then, but this role made me the perfect target, the ideal Mark, the responsible one who doesn't ask too many questions, so desperate to keep the peace that she overlook any inconsistency, any detail that doesn't fit the happy family narrative. I don't believe, even now, that they woke up one morning and thought, let's rob our daughter. I think they were so deep in their own shame about their financial failures, so consumed by their terror of their carefully constructed image crumbling, that their thinking became pathologically warped. They saw me not as their child, but as a family resource, a tool, an untapped asset they could use to keep the ship from sinking, to keep up appearances. And I, the good daughter, was that resource. The day my world unraveled started out with a soul-crushing, horrifying normalcy. I was 28 years old, living in a small but cheerful apartment a couple of hours away from my hometown, and working as a graphic designer for a mid-sized marketing firm. I was genuinely proud of the life I was building for myself. It was modest, but it was entirely mine. I paid my own rent, my own bills. I had a good credit score that I'd meticulously cultivated, a little bit of money in savings, and a 5-year plan that involved eventually buying a small condo. I was, by all reasonable measures, happy. That phone call from the collections agent was the first hairline crack in the facade. As I said, he was polite but firm, his voice devoid of any emotion as he informed me that I had defaulted on a business loan. He mentioned the name of an LLC Venture Solutions Group, a name that meant nothing to me. I actually laughed. It wasn't a sound of amusement. It was a short, sharp, hysterical bark of disbelief. That's impossible, I said, my heart beginning a frantic, galloping rhythm against my ribs. There's been a mistake. It has to be identity theft. Someone stole my information. He sighed, a sound of weary patience. We can certainly look into that, ma'am. However, the application on file used your social security number, a high-resolution copy of your driver's license, and was executed with digital signatures that originated from an IP address that traces back to your family's home address. This loan was opened 3 years ago. 3 years ago. The words hung in the air. My brain, sputtering to life, did the horrifying math. I was 25. I had just finished a design internship. I was home for that summer, living with my parents to save money before starting my first full-time job. The same summer my dad had excitedly announced he was starting his new consulting firm. The same summer he asked to borrow my driver's license to update some family insurance documents. The blood drained from my face so quickly I felt lightheaded. My hands began to shake violently. The man on the phone kept talking. Something about payment arrangements and legal ramifications, but his voice became a distant, meaningless buzz. That was the precise moment of discovery, and my body reacted long before my mind could even begin to process the enormity of the betrayal. A wave of icy cold washed over me from head to toe. My thoughts, usually so linear and organized, just scattered into 1,000 disconnected fragments. I know now, this is a classic trauma response. My brain, sensing a threat of existential proportions, was shutting down the rational higher-functioning parts, and my internal alarm system was just blaring, a deafening, silent scream. The feeling wasn't even emotional in that moment. It was purely physical, a high-pitched buzzing in my ears, a crushing tightness in my chest, and this bizarre, terrifying sensation of watching myself from a few feet away, a classic sign of dissociation. After I somehow managed to end the call, I just sat there in my office chair, staring at the cheerful, sunlit room for a solid 10 minutes. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. Then, a frantic, desperate energy took over. I tore my apartment apart, pulling open drawers, dumping out boxes, searching for my old files, the tax returns my dad had so helpfully prepared for me. I didn't even know what I was looking for, just something tangible, something real, some piece of paper that could prove I wasn't going insane. I called my bank, my personal credit card company. The representatives I spoke to were pleasant and confirmed that everything on my end, the accounts I knew about, looked fine. It just didn't make any sense. Fueled by a volatile cocktail of adrenaline and pure dread, I grabbed my keys, got in my car, and started the 2-hour drive to my parents' house. I didn't call, didn't warn them. I just drove, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. That drive was the longest 2 hours of my life. My mind was a war zone, one part of me desperately trying to convince the other that this was all a huge, laughable misunderstanding, that I'd get there, and my dad would clear it all up, and we'd all have a good laugh about the crazy scammer who almost got me. But another, colder part of me was piecing it all together, the casual request for my social, borrowing my license, the mail, the secretive taxes. It was like watching a horror movie where you know who the killer is before the protagonist does. The familiar highway stretched out before me, a road I'd driven hundreds of times for holidays and birthdays, but now it felt alien and menacing. When I finally pulled onto their street, their house looked exactly the same, a perfect picture of domestic tranquility. It made me feel sick. My mom was in the front garden, tending to her roses, a picture of serene contentment. I walked right past her without a word, a cold, silent fury propelling me forward. I went straight to my dad's home office at the back of the house. He always kept it locked, a rule I'd never questioned. I used to think it was just a charming little quirk, part of his important businessman persona. But I knew where he kept the spare key on top of the doorframe, a place I'd seen him reach for 1,000 times. The office was perfectly neat and organized, a testament to my dad's entire public-facing act. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and leather. I started yanking open drawers of his large mahogany desk, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get a grip on the brass handles. Desk drawers, shelves, nothing. Then I moved to the filing cabinet. Top drawer, nothing. Second drawer, nothing. And then, in the bottom drawer, tucked behind a thick stack of old, legitimate tax records, I found it, a dark green, unassuming folder with a simple white label typed on it. It just said, Project V. My breath caught in my throat, my heart hammered against my ribs. With trembling fingers, I lifted it out and opened it on his desk. Inside wasn't just one loan application, there were 3. The first was the business loan for Venture Solutions Group that the collections agent had called about. There it was, my name, my social security number, and a signature that was a perfect, chilling forgery of my own. Attached to it was a copy of my driver's license and a glowing business plan full of my father's signature hopeful jargon about synergy and market disruption. The second file was for a line of credit, also in my name, with an outstanding balance of over $50,000. The third was a collection of credit card applications, at least 5 of them, all in my name, all from different banks. The statements showed they had been opened, systematically maxed out on business expenses, and then closed over the last 5 years. I did a rough, nauseating calculation in my head. The total debt they had secretly and methodically put in my name was close to $200,000, but it was the very last document in the folder, a single piece of paper at the back, that truly and irrevocably shattered me. It was a letter, typed and dated a year earlier, from my father to my mother and brother. It was a contingency plan. In it, with cold, clinical language, he laid out the strategy if his investments didn't generate the returns he expected. The debt structure, he explained, was set up so that the primary burden would fall on her, on me. Her credit is the cleanest, he had written, and her income is stable and reliable. She'll be able to manage the monthly payments, and it will keep the rest of us solvent and protect the family's primary assets. It's the best way to protect the family as a whole. She's strong. She can handle it. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a desperate one-time act. It was a calculated strategy, a business decision. I wasn't his daughter. I was collateral. I was a financial tool, a safety net with a social security number, a designated scapegoat. The love I thought was protecting me was actually the cage they had built around me all along. The shock was so profound it was physical. I've read since that the brain can register intense social rejection and betrayal in the same areas that process physical pain. Reading that letter, I didn't just feel emotionally hurt. I felt a deep, physical wound, as if a part of me had been surgically removed without my knowledge or consent. I walked out of that office holding the green folder like it was a radioactive artifact. My body felt numb, hollowed out, but my mind was a screaming chaos. My mother was now in the kitchen, humming a cheerful tune while she washed vegetables in the sink. The domesticity of the scene was so grotesquely normal it felt like a hallucination. She turned and smiled when she saw me, a warm, familiar smile that now looked like a horrifying, ill-fitting mask. "Honey, what a wonderful surprise. You should have called. I would have made your favorite lunch," she said, drying her hands on her floral apron. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. I just walked to the large oak dining room table, the very same table where my dad used to lay out all his impossible dreams, and I opened the folder. With deliberate, shaking hands, I began to lay the papers out, one by one, across the polished wood, the loan applications, the credit card statements, the forged signatures, and finally, the letter. Her smile evaporated. Her eyes jumped from my pale, rigid face down to the papers, and I saw a flicker of pure, animal fear before her expression went carefully, unnervingly blank. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice a little too high, a little too brittle. "This," I said, my own voice a low, guttural tremor, fueled by a rage I had never known I possessed, "is a $200,000 lie. This is my name, my signature, my life. And you are going to explain it to me now." Just then, my father walked in from the living room, a folded newspaper tucked under his arm, a pleasant, relaxed expression on his face. He took in the scene in an instant, me, pale and trembling with fury, my mother, frozen by the sink, the incriminating documents spread out like evidence at a crime scene. His cheerful demeanor vanished, replaced by a cold, hard mask. He didn't even look at the documents at first. He looked straight at me. "You went in my office," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. "You stole my identity," I shot back, my voice cracking with the sheer force of my disbelief. We seem to have different priorities when it comes to personal violations. What happened next wasn't the tearful confession or the desperate apology that some small, naive part of me was still clinging to. What happened next was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, a horrifying, multi-pronged assault on my reality. It started with him trying to minimize and dismiss it. "Stole your identity." "Don't be so dramatic," my father scoffed, finally letting his eyes drift over the papers with a dismissive air. "This was a family investment. A strategic move. We were building a business for all of us, for your future, for Mark's future, for your mother. By taking out fraudulent loans in my name without my knowledge or permission." I cried, the words tearing out of my throat. "How is that a family investment? That's a crime. It's fraud." Then came the gaslighting, swift and brutal. "You knew about this," my father said, his voice shifting into a tone of calm, paternal reason. It was chilling. "We talked about it that summer. You were home from college. You were all for it. You were excited about the consulting business. You said you wanted to help the family any way you could." I just stared at him, my mind spinning frantically, desperately searching the archives of my memory for this completely invented conversation. Had I been that naive, so oblivious? Had I somehow agreed to this and blocked it out? But I knew, with the only shred of certainty I had left in the world, that it had never, ever happened. This is what they do. This is the art of the manipulator. They invent entire histories, entire conversations, to make you question your own sanity, It makes the betrayal so much deeper because you don't just feel betrayed by their actions, you start to feel betrayed by your own mind. No, I said, shaking my head, trying to clear the fog. No, we never had that conversation. I think I would remember signing a loan document for $100,000. My mother, who had been silent until now, finally scurried over from the sink, her role shifting from frozen statue to supportive wife. Her voice was soft, pleading, the voice she always used when she was trying to smooth things over. Honey, please, your father was under so much pressure. He was just trying to build a future for us. Things have been so hard. We did it all for the family. We were trying to protect you from all the stress and worry. Protect me. The irony was so bitter, so profoundly toxic, it tasted like acid in my mouth. You protected me by secretly ruining my financial future, by making me the designated sacrifice so you could maintain your lifestyle. I picked up the letter, my hand shaking so hard the paper rattled. Is this protection? Writing a plan where I am the one who can handle the debt you illegally racked up in my name. My father's face darkened. The calm, reasonable facade cracked. And the terrifying anger I knew so well from my childhood. The anger I was always tasked with soothing flared to life. You were always so selfish, so ungrateful, he boomed, his voice echoing in the quiet house. We gave you everything. A home, clothes on your back, an education. The one time we need you to be a part of this family, to actually contribute something meaningful, you throw it in our faces. Your brother would have helped. Mark understands what family means. He understands loyalty. And there it was. The final, devastating twist of the knife. The comparison to Mark, casting me as the defective, unloving outsider who just didn't get it. My entire life, I had contorted myself into the shape of the good, responsible, loving daughter. And the second I finally stood up for myself, the instant I refused to be a silent victim, I was the villain. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry, I found out. They felt entitled to my life, my credit, my future, as if it were just another asset in their portfolio. And in many ways, their complete and utter lack of remorse, their furious indignation at being caught, hurt more than the money ever could. It was the final, definitive proof that in their eyes, I wasn't a person with her own hopes and dreams. I was just a utility. I stood there, surrounded by the three people I had loved most in the world, and I had never in my life felt so terrifyingly, completely alone. A strange calm washed over me. The screaming in my head stopped. With slow, deliberate movements, I calmly gathered the incriminating documents from the table and slid them back into the green folder. I looked at my parents, their faces a grotesque mixture of defiance, self-pity, and anger. I'm taking these, I said, my voice completely empty of all the roiling emotion that was churning inside me. This conversation is over. I turned and walked out of that house, leaving the front door wide open. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away without looking back, the green folder sitting on the passenger seat like a bomb. I had no idea where I was going. I just knew that the girl who had walked into that house a few hours earlier was gone forever. She'd been erased, and a total, terrified stranger was now in the driver's seat. The days and weeks that followed that confrontation are a hazy, distinct blur of shock and a grief so profound it felt bottomless. The hot, clarifying anger that had propelled me out of that house and down the highway cooled into a thick, heavy, suffocating fog of despair. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. I'd go to work, somehow managing to smile at colleagues and meet deadlines, my professionalism a thin, brittle mask. Then I would come home to my silent apartment and just stare at the wall, at the ceiling, at nothing. The world outside kept moving at its normal pace, but I was stuck, frozen in the amber of that one horrific afternoon. My own mind became a prison. The nights were the absolute worst. Sleep was a luxury I could no longer afford. When exhaustion finally claimed me, I was plagued by looping, vivid nightmares of finding the folder, of the words in that letter, of my father's angry, contorted face, of my mother's pleading, manipulative eyes. I would wake up gasping, my heart pounding, drenched in sweat. I learned later that this is a classic feature of betrayal trauma. Your brain, unable to process the unthinkable, replays the traumatic event over and over, as if it's trying to solve an impossible puzzle, trying to find a different outcome that makes sense. It wasn't like thinking, it was like being mentally tortured by my own memories. The emotional fallout was a full-scale catastrophe. I was grieving the loss of my parents and my brother, but it was a strange, complicated grief because they were all still alive. I was grieving the childhood I thought I had, which now felt like a total sham, a carefully constructed stage play in which I was an unwitting actor, and I was drowning in a sticky, corrosive shame, this horrible, creeping feeling that this was somehow my fault. Was I stupid? Too trusting? Why didn't I see the signs? Betrayal from your own family, the people who are biologically and socially programmed to protect you, triggers this intense, devastating self-doubt. I felt utterly worthless, as if my only true value to my parents had been as a financial escape hatch. My entire personality began to shift. I had always been so open, so quick to trust, but I became suspicious and wary of everyone. A kind word from a colleague felt like they were trying to manipulate me. A friendly neighbor asking how I was doing felt like a hostile interrogation. This state of constant high-alert hypervigilance is your nervous system's logical response to having your fundamental sense of safety completely violated. My world had proven itself to be fundamentally unsafe, and my body was trying desperately to make sure I was never that vulnerable again. I stopped answering my phone unless I knew who it was. I ignored texts. I pulled away from my friends because I couldn't even begin to explain the surreal horror of what was happening. How do you tell someone your own parents methodically and strategically destroyed your financial future for their own gain? It sounds like the plot of a bad movie, not something that happens in a quiet suburban family. The practical consequences were just as nightmarish. I had a fraudulent debt of nearly $200,000 attached to my name. My credit score, which I had worked so hard and so conscientiously to build, was utterly destroyed. Collections agencies began calling me, not once or twice, but multiple times a day, every day. My dream of buying a small house, of building a stable future, was just gone. I was facing the real possibility of bankruptcy at 28 because of a family investment I never even knew existed. It wasn't just about the money, it was about them stealing my future, my dreams, the life I had planned for myself. My extended family quickly became a disaster zone. My parents, predictably, had been busy spinning their own narrative. To my aunts, uncles, and cousins, I was the hysterical, ungrateful daughter who was overreacting and trying to destroy the family over a simple misunderstanding. I received confused, then disappointed, then accusatory text messages and voicemails. They didn't have the facts, only the fiction my parents had fed them. My brother, Mark, called me once, about a week after the confrontation. He didn't yell. It was somehow worse. His voice was heavy with a calm, righteous disappointment. "Mom and Dad are a complete wreck," he said, the judgment dripping from every word. "I don't know what you think you're doing, but they were just trying to keep the family afloat during a hard time. You're tearing everyone apart by making this a huge legal thing. Can't you just let it go for the sake of the family?" "Let it go?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Mark, letting it go means I'm legally responsible for $200,000 of debt. It means I accept bankruptcy. It means I have to live with the lie. Sometimes you have to make sacrifices for family," he said, as if quoting from a script my father had written. "They're your parents. They sacrificed for you." That phone call was the moment I knew, with sickening finality, that I had lost my entire family. They had all chosen the lie. They had chosen the narrative of my villainy because it was easier, more comfortable than confronting the ugly truth about my parents and the dysfunctional system we had all been a part of. Letting it go meant sacrificing myself on the altar of their comfort. That was a sacrifice I was no longer willing to make. For about a month, I was completely paralyzed, adrift in that fog of grief and shock. But one morning, I was sitting on my sofa, staring at a growing pile of angry red collection notices on my coffee table. And I realized with a sudden, startling clarity that I had a choice. It was a simple, binary choice. I could let this break me, let them win, and become the helpless victim they wanted me to be. Or I could fight. I could choose myself, maybe for the very first time in my entire life. The first step was by far the hardest. I found a therapist who specialized in trauma and complex PTSD. I remember sitting in her quiet, softly lit office for that first session, clutching a tissue in my sweaty palm, so overcome with shame and humiliation I could barely look at her. But when I finally managed to stammer out the whole sordid story, from the phone call to the green folder to the confrontation, she didn't look at me with pity. She looked at me with profound understanding. She gave my pain a name: betrayal, trauma. She explained that my reactions, the hypervigilance, the nightmares, the emotional numbness, the self-blame weren't me being weak or overly dramatic. They were a completely normal and predictable response to a catastrophic breach of trust from primary attachment figures. Just hearing that clinical validation was like someone throwing me a lifeline in a stormy sea. It was the first time I had felt sane in months. My therapist and I worked on a few different fronts at once. First, we had to get me stable. That meant taking practical, concrete steps to regain a sense of agency. She gently but firmly pushed me to seek professional help. I found a lawyer at a legal aid society who listened to my story with grim focus, and a nonprofit credit counselor who helped me understand the labyrinthine financial mess I was in. Documenting everything became my new, grim mission. I gathered every piece of evidence, the contents of the green folder, my phone records showing the collection's calls, and I started a journal where I wrote down every single interaction, every memory that surfaced, every feeling. This wasn't about plotting revenge, it was about survival, and taking concrete action, no matter how small, was a powerful antidote to the feeling of complete and utter powerlessness that had consumed me. Therapy itself was slow, painful, and arduous work. We began working on challenging the twisted, self-blaming thoughts that had taken over my brain, a technique I now know as cognitive behavioral therapy. Thoughts like, "This is all my fault for being so trusting," or "I will never be able to trust anyone again." My therapist would gently guide me to reframe them based on evidence. "This is my fault," slowly, painstakingly, became buff. I was the victim of a calculated, long-term deception by the people I had every biological and emotional reason to trust. It sounds so simple, but repeating it, writing it down, and looking at the folder of evidence to support it slowly began to rewire the neural pathways in my brain. Just as important was the somatic, or body-based, work. My therapist explained that trauma isn't just a mental event. It gets stored in the body. My nervous system was stuck in a perpetual state of fight or flight. She taught me simple grounding exercises to use when I felt a wave of panic rising. I'd press my feet firmly into the floor and name 5 things I could see, 4 things I could feel, 3 things I could hear. It seems almost silly, but it was incredibly effective at pulling my brain out of the traumatic past and anchoring it in the safety of the present moment. I started practicing deep breathing exercises to help calm my overactive nervous system. I took long walks, not for exercise, but just to feel my body moving and to slowly, carefully reconnect with it after the profound dissociation I'd experienced. The hardest part of the healing process was rebuilding my identity and learning to set boundaries. My entire sense of self had been based on my role as the good daughter, the family peacemaker. Who was I without that? Journaling became my sacred space. I started writing about what I wanted, what I valued, what my dreams were, completely separate from my family's expectations or needs. It was a slow, awkward process of getting to know myself as an individual. Setting boundaries was terrifying. It started small. I changed my phone number to stop the calls from my extended family. Then, with my lawyer's help, I drafted a formal cease and desist letter to my parents and brother, stating that all future communication had to go through his office. Sending that letter was one of the scariest and most empowering things I have ever done. It wasn't just a practical legal step. It was a profound declaration of independence. It was me saying, "You no longer have unfettered access to me. There is a line, and you cannot cross it." Every boundary I set, no matter how small, felt like laying a new brick in the foundation of my new self, a self built on my own terms. I learned to say no without feeling a crushing wave of guilt. I learned that I do not have to set myself on fire just to keep other people warm. Rebuilding trust in others, especially in intimate relationships, has been a whole other mountain to climb, but I'm learning. Starting small with a few trusted friends who have shown me through their consistent actions what true loyalty looks like. It's been 5 years since that awful day I found the green folder. My life today is nothing like I thought it would be when I was 28, but in so many fundamental ways, it's more authentically mine. The legal battle was long, draining, and incredibly ugly. It involved filing a police report for identity theft and fraud, an act that felt like a profound betrayal in itself, even though I was the one who had been betrayed. It ended, not with a dramatic courtroom showdown, but with a mediated settlement. To avoid criminal charges, my parents had to sell their house, the house I grew up in, to pay off a huge chunk of the fraudulent debt. The rest was ultimately forgiven by the lenders after my lawyer and I proved conclusively that the loans were obtained through fraud. My credit isn't ruined anymore, but the record of the fraud is still there, a permanent scar on my financial history, a quiet reminder of what happened. I have no relationship with my parents or my brother. The estrangement is total and complete. The last I heard, they moved to another state to live near Mark and his family. I never received an apology, not one word of genuine remorse. I have had to come to the painful acceptance that I probably never will. In the story they tell themselves and others, I am still the selfish, vindictive daughter who destroyed the family over money. For us to ever reconcile, they would have had to demonstrate genuine accountability, a deep understanding of the harm they caused, and a sustained effort to repair the damage. They were, and are, simply not capable of that. But this story isn't about them anymore. It's about me. I'm still in therapy, though not as often. Healing, I've learned, isn't a destination you arrive at. It's a continuous process. It isn't a straight line. There are still days when a song on the radio, a phrase in a movie, or the scent of my mom's perfume on a stranger will trigger a memory, and I'll feel that old familiar tightness in my chest. But the difference now is that I have the tools to deal with it. I can use my breathing exercises. I can call a friend. I can remind myself that I am safe now, that I am not that powerless 28-year-old anymore. I'm still a graphic designer, and I still love what I do. But I'm also a fierce, unwavering advocate for my own well-being. I'm in a healthy, deeply loving relationship with a partner who knows my whole story and respects my boundaries without question. We talk openly and honestly about everything, especially finances. I've learned through him that true trust isn't the blind faith I was raised on. It's built slowly, brick by brick, through consistent, honest, and reliable actions over time. The biggest, most profound lesson in all of this was learning my own self-worth. For so long, my value was externally validated, tied to my family's approval and my designated role as the peacemaker. The betrayal, as agonizingly painful as it was, forced me to untangle myself from that toxic dynamic and find my value within myself. I learned that I am worthy of respect, honesty, and protection, even if it meant I had to be the one to provide that protection for myself. The ultimate vindication wasn't watching them lose their house. It was building my own home, a life built on a solid foundation of self-respect, radical honesty, and unbreakable boundaries. I didn't just survive what they did to me. I learned how to thrive, not in spite of it, but because of the strength I was forced to find. The journey has been long, and the scars, both emotional and financial, will always be there. But they don't define me anymore. They are a map of where I've been, a testament to my own strength and my ability to rebuild a life from nothing. My life is smaller in some ways. My family tree has certainly been pruned, but it's also more solid, more honest, and more joyful than I ever could have imagined. I chose to save myself, and I would make that same painful, necessary choice 1,000 times over. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. Sharing this isn't easy, but I truly believe that our stories have power. They can help us heal, and they can certainly help us feel less alone in our struggles. If this resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel. More importantly, I want this to be a conversation. I have to ask you, and I really want to know what you think. Was I wrong to take legal action and refuse to help my family, even though it meant they would lose everything they had built? Let me know your honest thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective matters. Thank you for listening.